Section B, 8-mark question. Every single year I see students waste an astronomical amount of time on this question, so it's of utmost importance for you to refine your technique, make sure you've got a strategy going into your 8-mark question. This is the final non-subjective question on your exam paper. That means it's not marked in terms of depth or levels, it's simply marked whether it's right or wrong. How are the marks broken down in the 8-mark question? So this would be 2K, 2 application, 2 analysis, and 2 evaluation. So the 8-marker does not only have analysis marks, it also has 2 small evaluation marks to keep in mind. This 8-mark question is going to be assessed 4 separate times, once in paper 1, once in paper 2, and twice in paper 3. That means it makes up around 32 marks, which is equivalent to about 10% of your entire A-level. So 10% of your entire A-level, of your university space, of your apprenticeship space, is dependent on this 8-mark question. Moving on to the structure. How would I go about structuring your 8-mark question? So first things first, I would always start these 8-mark questions with defining any key terms from the question. So it doesn't have to specifically be a term. For example, it doesn't specifically have to be a monopoly, because a monopoly has a solid definition. If it's a phrase also that you can kind of justify into words, that's also valid to define. But yeah, I would 100% start with defining a few key terms. From there, the structure is very simple. It's simply a KAA paragraph followed by an evaluation point, and then I would do another paragraph and another evaluation point. So 2 paragraphs followed by 2 evaluation points. Now, 2 things clear up. When I say KAA paragraph, that is just talking about knowledge application analysis, but there is structure for KAA paragraphs. I'll link the video down below. It's called the perfect paragraph structure video on my channel, where it just talks through an A-star paragraph structure, which is state your point, application, analysis, link back to question, which covers all those KAA points. The second point I want to mention is thinking back to the mark breakdown. So if you look back to this, there's only 2 marks for evaluation, and this can really help minimize the amount of time you spend on the 8-marker. So I've said here to use 2 evaluation points. So if one of your evaluations, like I just said, if it's decently developed, do not do another evaluation point, since there's only 2 marks and you want to minimize the amount of time you spend on these 8-mark questions. So like I always say, you can surplus, you can spend more time on the bigger answer questions like the 15-mark question. If you are doing 2 points of evaluation, keep in mind that it's only 2 marks, so they need to be very simple, not very developed points, and very easy to pick up the marks. And the reason why I'm saying don't develop them too much is because of timing. You do not want to waste time, you do not need to waste on this question. Evaluation points I usually tell students to avoid in 25-mark questions, like a very simple opportunity cost evaluation works perfectly here, because there's not much need for depth, anything like that. It's just a simple state your point and you pick up the mark. With regards to timing, what do you want to aim for on this question? I would 100% say 6 to 8 minutes. And this entirely goes back to the quantity of practice you do. Like I've said in previous videos, there's around 10 years of past papers now. This means if you do that 8-marker 10 times under exam conditions, doing it properly, you'll become much better at it. You'll start seeing patterns in 8-markers. You'll become a lot more efficient at writing it out. Therefore, that's why I say for students who are putting the work in, and those are the A and A-star students, I would say 100% try aim for 6 minutes on your 8-mark question, because with practice, I've had students in previous years that did this consistently. And like I say, it gives you a surplus for the bigger questions. But the main thing here, and the main trap with these small answer questions, it's not really about saving the time, it's about not going over on timing. So with the 8-mark question, your upper limit, your maximum always needs to be 8 minutes. If you ever run over 8 minutes, I would even say be this strict with yourself, especially in practice. Stop answering the question, finish your sentence and move on, because this is where it gets you. Like I said, perfectionism kills your A-star, it kills your A or A-star, because if you're always trying to get 100% of these questions, there might be a year where the 8-marker is really difficult and it's not worth the amount of time you spend on it. Therefore, if you hit 8 minutes in your exam, I just want you to move on. Move on to the 12-marker, move on to the next question. Do not try spend an extra 5 minutes. Do not waste any extra time. And it's almost exam discipline, knowing that you haven't fully answered a question, but because the time constraint has hit, you need to move on, as this allows yourself to give 100% shot to your 12-marker, to your 15-marker, without actually eating into the time of them, and therefore degrading the quality of what you can write in those questions. To help consolidate that structure, I'll go through 1 or 2 examples here. So paper 3, 2022, 8-mark question. So examine 2 demographic factors of influencing development in Kenya. Like I said, with all these questions, your theory needs to be strong, and then you need to use the context. So it's a combination of them both. So just by looking at that question, you should be able to brainstorm some demographic factors that are likely going to affect development. Now, obviously, I wouldn't expect you to be able to do it for Kenya specifically, but that's where the context comes in. So like I said, you need to be solid on your theory. So content mastery is a must, but then also for these questions, you need to use the context. So let's do it here. I'll do it live. I haven't looked at this context yet. So examine 2 demographic. So we're looking at demographic factors that influence development in Kenya. Like I said, whenever I look through the extracts, what am I trying to do? I first look through the titles. If the title is relevant, I will read it. If the title is not relevant, I'm not going to read it because it's not going to be relevant to that specific question. So demographic factors that influences development. So let's see this. Changes in interest rate in sub-Saharan Africa. It's probably not going to be relevant, so I'm not going to read that. So it's about Kenya, but Kenya has an absolute advantage in cut flowers. We are looking for demographic factors influencing development. That does not sound very much to do with development, so I'm not going to read that. The demography, I think I say, that sounds very relevant, so we'll read that, but let's quickly check the other extracts. Growth and development in Africa. This is very short, so it doesn't look like there's much in there. Then sub-Saharan growth and development. So that would probably be a good one to get your application from. So the main one that looks relevant here is extract E. So quickly, look, even me, is obviously because I'm recording as well, but it's very easy for the question to leave your brain. So I constantly quickly check the question just to make sure I've internalized the question. So 2 demographic factors that influences development in Kenya, and let's go back to the extract. So let's try find any demographic factors that affect the development in Kenya. So demography in Kenya, so falling birth rates, literally the first word, I would say that is a demographic factor that influences development. Because especially, like I said, you need to know your theory, because that is very backed up by theory, because you learn that in just economics content. So that's probably, I would, if I was in the exam now, like I've said in previous videos, I'd have a red highlighter, I'd highlight that, and that's probably what I'd write for my 8-mark question. That'd be 1 paragraph. When accompanied by rising literacy, that also sounds like another paragraph point we can use. So literally within the first line, and if I was doing this in the exam, because I've looked only at the relevant extracts, within probably 30 seconds now, I've already found my 2 paragraph points, and if I really wanted to, I'd get on with the writing. But for the sake of the video, I will scan through the rest of the extract. So, level first growing, that sounds like another demographic factor you could probably mention. It kind of links to the literacy rate, so basically more children are in school, I believe that says, yeah. High fertility rate, population's dropping. Urbanization, that sounds like another massive factor that you can talk about, how it affects the it's a demographic factor that causes development. And urbanization is a really good one, because obviously if you know your theory, it's very easy to speak about why do people want to live in cities rather than in rural towns. And literally that question I've just asked you is answered by the extract. So why do people want to live there? There's economic advantages, more innovation, jobs, etc, etc. So like I always say, the context is absolute gem. That's why the points on the mark scheme are going to be from the extract, because it gives you so much. It's almost like a bit of a comprehension task, coupled with you using your economics theory to back it up. And sometimes like this, it basically gives you the theory you need to write as well. But now I'll run through an example of how I actually would answer it. So examine 2 demographic factors influencing development in Kenya. So first one I saw was falling birth rates, so I would probably pick that. So like I said, I always follow my paragraph structure, which is, and I would suggest you follow it as well. State your point, application, analysis, link back to question. It's very good, it hits all the KA marks, and obviously for this question, since it's an 8-mark question, I would add a bit of evaluation into the end. So we said 1 demographic factor is falling birth rates. Now if we quickly think about it, falling birth rates is going to increase development, isn't it? So the way I'd word it, state your point. Whenever you state your point, reuse as many words in the question as possible. Why? Because it tells your examiner you're directly answering the question. So sorry for my keyboard. 1 demographic factor that increases development is falling birth rates. And mind my spelling. And now straight away, that's me stating my point. I'm not going to jump into any chains of analysis yet. I'm moving on to the second part of it, which is application. And like we always say, there's 2 marks here reserved for application. So I'm going to put E.G. I'm going to find a bit of evidence basically to back up this point. Why is one demographic factor that increases development falling birth rates? Let's have a quick scan through the extract. Now, I just want to remind you here, whenever you're looking for application, if you remember back to when we started looking at the context, I said there was a figure that was really good as well. So just make sure you don't just neglect the figures and you do have a scan through them. Here, I don't think it's very relevant for this. If I just quickly run through this, just to back that point up. So the point was falling birth rates. I would probably just write that out. So I'm probably just going to add that into there. So that's using the extract, proves that there are actually falling birth rates in Kenya right now. So that's application done. Now it's change of analysis. So I'm proving, I'm backing it up with economics theory. Now it's just about connecting your economics knowledge to the question. So in this scenario, why does falling birth rates lead to development? So the way I would go about it is falling birth rate, falling birth rates will lead to an increase in I'd say probably the levels of human capital. Now, this is what I speak about being step by step with the chain of analysis. So I've kind of made a jump there. I've kind of gone from birth rates to increased levels of human capital. But this is the essence of chains of analysis. Now, in my next few chains of analysis, I need to go on to explain it. Because if this examiner, like I always say, assume the examiner has no content knowledge. If the examiner did not know anything about economics, he would not know how I made the link from falling birth rates to increased levels of human capital. So this is literally what I'm going to go about to do in the next chains of analysis. So falling birth rates lead to increased levels of human capital. This is as, and there's loads of different avenues you can take to answer this question. This is just the first one that's come to our mind whilst recording. But this is as mothers can now stay at, this means mothers can now pursue further education as do not have child responsibilities. And then I'll link that to economics, but I actually want to add another point here. So also with less births, less children, thus, and if there's less children, it means there's less strain on education or schooling, since one massive problem in developing countries is that high birth rates lead to loads of children, of course, and lots of children mean that there's lots of strain on the schools, because there's just too many kids they need to educate, and because there's too many, like in a classroom, if there's 100 children, the level of education, the quality of education is obviously going to be degraded, because there's less one-on-one support since there's just too many students. So also less births means less children, thus less strain on education and schooling, leading to higher levels of education. Now I would just add in the classic chains of analysis. Both lead to increased levels of productivity, and if workers are more productive, they can produce more per unit time, and if you can produce more output per unit time, it means that worker can demand higher wages. Why? If you think back to labour markets, think back to MRP, his MRP will be higher, meaning that worker can demand higher wages. And then I'm just going to link this to classic link, which is income tax. So worker demand higher wages, increasing what's the country? Kenya's level of income tax revenue, thus allowing more funds for Kenya to spend on development. And of course, depending on how much time you have, you can keep on going here. You can say that with more productive workers, like I said, there's more output. If there's more output, it's likely that firms will make more profit. If firms make more profit, there's more corporation tax revenue. More corporation tax revenue means you can do the same chain again. Means Kenya can spend more on development, and you can even give an example on what they want to spend on. But this would be enough detail for now, because you're going to write 2 of these paragraphs, and I want to show you how I would evaluate this as well. So now we just need to evaluate this, and how would I go about doing this? Again, all these questions are just very related to the extract. So our point here has basically been, and this is to keep in mind, so valuation is a counter argument. It's like a limitation. So you're trying to find a limitation of what you said, or like a counter argument to what you've said. So what we've said is falling birth rates is going to lead to an increase in development. And let's see if there's anything that contradicts that in the extract. And this paragraph is a great example of that. So we've said falling birth rates is going to lead to increase in development, because basically what we said, there's less people, there's less children, etc., etc. But this actually states that Kenya's population is continuing to rise. So even though families are smaller, the total number of children the total number of children continue to grow. So that is probably something I'd use for my evaluation. There's loads of evaluation points you can use here, but if you can get one for the extract, it is better, and you can actually pick up application marks alongside evaluation. Also, a side tip that I will mention quite often is whenever you are evaluating, be very explicit with it. And I give the same tips for application. Whenever you use application, like I would always use the phrase E.G or for example. The reason for this is the sad reality that examiners, they're marking hundreds of papers, thousands of questions, and they're not paid enough to pay attention to every single question for every single student. So you just need to make it as clear as possible to the examiner that you're doing the right things, that you're including the application, that you're evaluating. Make it jump out to the examiner, and that's one way I used to do it, and the one way I tell my students to do it. So whenever you evaluate, I would always write however in evaluation, so it's clear to your examiner you're evaluating, so they have to give you the marks for evaluation there. Since I've read so many essays where it's hard to actually tell the student is evaluating without paying lots of attention to the essay, since they hide it in really nice English terms. But like I always say, be very transactional. You're not writing an English essay, you're not trying to make it sound nice, just get in there, pick up the marks, and that's all you need to do. So the way I would word this is, however in evaluation, the effectiveness of falling birth rates leading to an increase in development depends on whether population size is increasing. And then I would just basically reference extract E. So as mentioned in extract E, I think it's line 14. Yep, something like line 14. Population size is increasing, thus negating the positive effects of decreased birth rates. So with this 8-mark question, the evaluation is very simple. It's just finding a limitation. This makes it sound really technical. You can be really simple with it as well. Like I said, there's only 2 evaluation points. You can say something like, however, this depends on the time lag, as in the short run, falling birth rates won't have much of a positive effect, but in the long run, obviously, over 10 years, it'll have a much different effect than in 3 months. So you can use a really simple evaluation point like that as well. And hopefully a few months for your exams, these are the types of evaluation points you just naturally think of. Anyway, I hope that'll help, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions.